The Scarecrow's Revenge. The town of Hollow Creek was a mere speck on the vast expanse of the American heartland. Surrounded by miles and miles of golden fields, it was a place where time seemed to move slower, and the horizon stretched endlessly in every direction. The sunrises painted the sky in hues of pink and orange, while the sunsets bathed the town in a warm, golden glow. The rhythmic sounds of crickets and the distant cawing of crows were the only interruptions to the otherwise serene silence. The houses, mostly wooden and a century old, were spaced generously apart, each with its own plot of land. The roads were unpaved, and the only traffic was the occasional tractor or pickup truck. The townsfolk knew each other by name, and their lives were intertwined by generations of shared history. But amidst the beauty and tranquility, there was one sight that stood out, a silent sentinel that had watched over the fields for as long as anyone could remember, the old Scarecrow. It stood alone in the middle of a vast cornfield, its wooden frame leaning slightly to one side. The burlap sack that served as its head was faded and stained, with two mismatched buttons for eyes that seemed to stare blankly into the distance. Its clothes, once vibrant, were now tattered and frayed, having borne the brunt of countless storms and seasons. The straw that once filled it generously now peeked out in sparse tufts, making it look even more skeletal. To the children of Hollow Creek, the Scarecrow was an object of fascination and fear. They would dare each other to approach it, especially on moonlit nights, when its silhouette took on an eerie, almost lifelike quality. Legends had sprung up around it, tales of how it came to life during the witching hour, seeking revenge on those who dared to mock it. As Halloween approached, the tales grew more frequent and the dares more daring. But this year, something was different. Whispers spread about strange occurrences in the fields, about shadows moving in the periphery, and an unsettling feeling of being watched. The old Scarecrow, it seemed, was no longer content to stand silently by. It had a story to tell, and a score to settle. And as the town prepared for its annual Halloween festivities, little did they know that they were about to become a part of the Scarecrow's revenge. In Hollow Creek, the townspeople were a tight-knit community, bound by generations of shared history. Among them were the Martins, the Thompsons, and the Garcias. The Martins, with their twin boys, Jake and Sam, were known for their boisterous laughter and love for mischief. The Thompsons, led by the town's postman, had a curious daughter named Lily, who was always accompanied by her trusty notebook. The Garcias, recent transplants to Hollow Creek, had a teenage son named Miguel, who was still finding his place among the town's youth. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, the children often sought entertainment in the vast fields surrounding the town. The old Scarecrow became a favorite target for their pranks. Jake and Sam once draped the Scarecrow in toilet paper, leaving it looking like a mummy till the rain washed it away. Lily, in her quest for a thrilling journal entry, once replaced its button eyes with glowing ones, causing a minor panic among the younger kids. Miguel, trying to fit in, was dared to paint a clown face on the Scarecrow, which he did, though with a heavy heart. But it wasn't just the children. Some adults, after a few drinks at the local tavern, would take their own jabs at the Scarecrow. Mr. Thompson, in a particularly inebriated state, once tried to set its straw hat on fire, laughing uproariously until his friends put it out. The Scarecrow, through all the abuse and mockery, stood silently, bearing witness to the town's antics. But as the tales suggested, perhaps it was biding its time, waiting for the perfect moment to exact its revenge. Hollow Creek, with its rich history, was a town steeped in legends and folklore. Among the most whispered tales were those of scarecrows coming to life on Halloween night. Old Mrs. Patterson, the town's unofficial historian, often spoke of a time when scarecrows were not just guardians of the fields but also protectors of the town's spirit. On All Hallows' Eve, she'd say, the line between our world and the spirit realm blurs, and the scarecrows serve as gatekeepers, ensuring no malevolent spirits cross over. Mr. O'Donnell, the town's oldest resident, had his own chilling tale. I once saw a scarecrow dance under the moonlight, he'd claim, his voice quivering, its straw fingers reaching out, beckoning the spirits to join its macabre waltz. These stories were not just tales to frighten children. They were also warnings. The town's elders, like Mrs. Patterson and Mr. O'Donnell, would often gather the younger folks, especially during the harvest season. Respect the traditions, Mrs. Patterson would admonish, her eyes scanning the faces of the Martins, Thompsons, Garcias, and other young pranksters. The scarecrow is not just straw and cloth. It's a symbol, a guardian. Mock it, and you mock the spirits. Mr. O'Donnell, leaning on his old wooden cane, would add, I've lived long enough to know that some legends are rooted in truth. Don't anger the spirits. Halloween is their night, and you do well to remember that. Despite the warnings, many dismissed these tales as mere superstitions. But as Halloween approached, and the Scarecrow bore the brunt of the town's mischief, one couldn't help but wonder if this year, the legends might come to life. The younger generation of Hollow Creek, fueled by modernity and a sense of invincibility, often scoffed at the legends. Jake and Sam Martin would roll their eyes whenever Mrs. Patterson began one of her tales, with Jake often quipping, "Maybe the Scarecrow just needs a dance partner, right Sam?" Lily Thompson, notebook in hand, would jot down the stories but often remarked, "It's just a good plot for a horror story, nothing more." Miguel Garcia, trying to fit in and shrug off his initial unease, laughed along, "If it comes to life, I'll just challenge it to a paint-off." Late-night gatherings at the local diner saw groups of teenagers mocking the tales, daring each other to spend a night in the field with the Scarecrow. "It's just a way to keep us from having fun," remarked Jenny, a high school senior, as she sipped her milkshake. "Old tales for old folks," added her friend, Mark, with a smirk. The chasm between belief and skepticism grew wider as Halloween approached. The elders' warnings became more fervent, and the youth's dismissals more brazen. In the heart of Hollow Creek, a silent Scarecrow stood, waiting, as the town unknowingly teetered on the edge of a chilling revelation. On the night of Halloween, Hollow Creek was bathed in the silvery glow of a full moon. The streets were alive with children dressed as ghouls, witches, and superheroes, their laughter echoing in the crisp autumn air. But beyond the town's boundaries, where the vast farmlands stretched, an unsettling atmosphere prevailed. An eerie wind whispered through the fields, making the cornstalks sway like spectral dancers. Shadows, elongated by the moonlight, played tricks on the eyes, making it hard to discern reality from imagination. Owls hooted from distant trees, their calls adding to the night's haunting symphony. In the heart of this desolate expanse, the old Scarecrow, which had stood motionless for years, began to show signs of life. At first, it was a subtle twitch of its burlap head, almost imperceptible. Then, its straw-filled hands clenched and unclenched, as if trying to grasp something. Its tattered clothes rustled, not just from the wind but from the movement beneath. As the night wore on, the Scarecrow's movements became more pronounced. It slowly lifted one wooden leg, then the other, as if testing its newfound mobility. The mismatched button eyes, which had stared blankly for so long, now seemed to focus with intent, scanning the horizon, the town, and the revelers in the distance. Back in Hollow Creek, the festivities continued, oblivious to the awakening happening in the fields. But as the clock neared midnight, the boundary between legend and reality was about to be shattered, and the town would soon discover the truth behind the Scarecrow's revenge. As the Scarecrow's consciousness flickered to life, it was overwhelmed by a rush of memories. Each act of mockery, every childish prank, and the countless instances of degradation it had endured flooded its mind. The laughter of Jake and Sam as they draped it in toilet paper, the gleam in Lily's eyes as she replaced its buttons, and the drunken jeers of adults echoed hauntingly. Every tug, every paint stroke, every flame that had ever threatened its existence was felt anew. With these memories came a torrent of emotions. The most potent of all was anger. An anger that had been festering, building up over the years, now ignited into a burning rage. The Scarecrow's straw-filled heart, which had never known emotion, was now consumed by a singular desire: revenge. It remembered the faces of those who had wronged it, their laughter, their dismissive attitudes. The tales of its power, once spoken in hushed tones, had been reduced to mere children's stories, and it yearned to prove them all wrong. The Scarecrow wanted them to feel the same fear, the same humiliation it had been subjected to for so long. As it slowly began to move, testing its limbs and feeling the earth beneath its wooden feet, a plan began to form. The town of Hollow Creek, lost in its festivities, had no idea that the legend they had so carelessly mocked was about to become their terrifying reality. The Scarecrow's revenge was about to unfold. With newfound purpose, the Scarecrow began its march towards Hollow Creek. As it approached the town's boundaries, a murder of crows descended from the night sky, circling it. With a mere thought, the Scarecrow commanded them, turning the birds into its eyes and ears, an extension of its will. The first sign of its supernatural presence was the shadows. They began to twist and contort in unnatural ways, elongating and wrapping around unsuspecting townsfolk, causing panic and disarray. Children, once gleefully collecting candy, now clung to their parents in terror as the very ground beneath them seemed to come alive. As the Scarecrow entered the heart of Hollow Creek, it unleashed its full power. With a wave of its straw-filled hand, it summoned the crows to dive and swoop, causing chaos and fear. Streetlights flickered and went out, plunging parts of the town into darkness, where the Scarecrow's control over the shadows was even more pronounced. The town's once joyful Halloween celebrations turned into a nightmare. Doors were hastily locked, and windows shuttered, but the Scarecrow's influence was inescapable. It could manipulate the very essence of darkness, making shadows reach through the smallest of cracks, caressing and terrifying those inside. Jake, Sam, and Lily, once the boldest of skeptics, found themselves pursued by their own shadows, which seemed to have a mind of their own. Miguel, regretting his earlier bravado, tried to use his paints to ward off the encroaching darkness, drawing symbols he'd seen in old books. The Scarecrow, standing tall in the town square, reveled in the chaos. Its once lifeless button eyes now glowed with an eerie light, watching as the townspeople faced the terror they had unknowingly invoked. The legends of Hollow Creek were not just tales, and the town was learning this in the most horrifying way possible. The once jovial atmosphere of Hollow Creek was now thick with fear and disbelief. Parents hurriedly gathered their children, pulling them indoors, while others stared in horror at the unfolding nightmare. Whispers of "it's just a legend and this can't be real" filled the air, but the evidence was undeniable. Jake and Sam Martin, once the ringleaders of mischief, found themselves cornered in an alley by their own elongated shadows. The Scarecrow, with its glowing button eyes, approached them slowly, the memory of their pranks evident in its menacing stance. The twins, paralyzed with fear, could only watch as the Scarecrow tilted its head, as if mocking their earlier bravado. Lily Thompson, clutching her notebook, tried to document the events, but her shadow, now acting of its own accord, snatched the notebook away, pages fluttering in the wind. As she looked up, the Scarecrow stood before her, its silhouette illuminated by the moon. The glowing eyes that she had once placed on it for a laugh now stared back at her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. Miguel Garcia, in a desperate attempt to make amends, approached the Scarecrow with a paintbrush, hoping to restore its original face. But as he neared, a flock of crows descended upon him, their caws deafening, driving him back. Throughout the town, similar confrontations occurred. Mr. Thompson, who had once tried to set the Scarecrow's hat on fire, found his own home inexplicably ablaze, with shadows dancing menacingly on the walls. Amidst the chaos, Mrs. Patterson and Mr. O'Donnell, the town's elders, tried to rally the townspeople. "We must make amends," cried Mrs. Patterson. But the Scarecrow's thirst for revenge was palpable, and the night was far from over. In the wake of the Scarecrow's terrifying onslaught, the town hall of Hollow Creek became a refuge for its shaken residents. The large wooden doors were bolted, and every window was covered, casting the room in a dim, candlelit glow. Mrs. Patterson, with Mr. O'Donnell by her side, stood at the front, trying to bring order to the panicked murmurs. "We've ignored our traditions and angered the spirits," Mrs. Patterson began, her voice trembling but resolute. "We must find a way to appease the Scarecrow and restore balance." Mr. O'Donnell nodded in agreement. "Our ancestors respected these legends for a reason. We must make amends." However, not everyone was in favor of appeasement. Mark, a young man known for his bravery, stood up defiantly. "We can't just bow down to this thing. We need to fight back, protect our town and our families." His sentiment was echoed by several others, including Jenny, the high school senior. "We have numbers on our side. If we band together, we can drive it back to where it came from." The room was divided. Some, like the Garcias, believed in seeking forgiveness, suggesting offerings or rituals to calm the angered spirit. Others, like Jake and Sam, guilt evident in their eyes, felt that confronting the Scarecrow was the only way to end the nightmare. As the debates grew heated, Lily, notebook in hand, proposed a middle ground. "What if we try to communicate with it? Understand what it truly wants? Maybe there's a way to end this without violence." The room fell silent, each person weighing the options, knowing that the fate of Hollow Creek hung in the balance. The decision they made that night would determine whether the town would see another dawn or be forever shrouded in the shadow of the Scarecrow's revenge. Determined to reclaim their town from the Scarecrow's reign of terror, a faction of Hollow Creek's residents, led by Mark and Jenny, devised a plan to capture and destroy the menacing figure. Reconnaissance, using drones, they planned to monitor the Scarecrow's movements, identifying patterns or weaknesses. Lily, with her keen observational skills, was tasked with noting any peculiar behaviors. Traps, Jake and Sam, drawing from their history of pranks, designed a series of traps. Deep pits covered with leaves and straw were dug around the town's perimeter, hoping to ensnare the Scarecrow. Miguel, using his artistic skills, painted illusory traps on the roads, aiming to confuse and misdirect it. Distractions, knowing the Scarecrow's control over crows, the townspeople gathered shiny objects, mirrors, and bright lights to distract the birds, hoping to weaken the Scarecrow's surveillance and control. Confrontation, a group of volunteers, armed with torches and tools, would act as the main force. Their goal was to corner the Scarecrow, using fire to keep it at bay, given its straw-filled composition. Safe zones. Mrs. Patterson and Mr. O'Donnell, respecting the old ways, set up safe zones in various parts of the town, using salt circles and ancient symbols to ward off the Scarecrow's influence. The night of the confrontation was thick with tension. As the moon rose, teams took their positions. Drones buzzed overhead, sending live feeds to a makeshift command center. The first few hours were quiet, but then, a drone spotted the Scarecrow moving towards the town's eastern edge. Traps were sprung, and the Scarecrow, showing an uncanny intelligence, managed to evade many of them. However, a pit trap designed by Jake and Sam succeeded, causing the Scarecrow to stumble. Seizing the opportunity, the confrontation team moved in, torches blazing. But the Scarecrow wasn't defeated easily. It summoned a thick blanket of shadows, causing disarray among the townspeople. The crows, despite the distractions, swooped down in defense of their master. The battle raged on, with the townspeople using every ounce of their wit and courage against the Scarecrow's supernatural might. The fate of Hollow Creek hung in the balance, with both sides determined to prevail. The confrontation reached its climax in the heart of Hollow Creek, the town square. The cobblestone ground, once a place of gatherings and celebrations, now became the stage for a battle between man and legend. The Scarecrow, standing tall and menacing, was surrounded by a swirling mass of crows, their caws echoing ominously. Its button eyes glowed with an eerie luminescence, and with every step it took, shadows writhed and stretched, reaching out like tendrils to ensnare anyone in their path. Facing it were the determined townspeople, a mix of young and old, armed with torches, tools, and a collective will to protect their home. Mark, leading the charge, shouted, "For Hollow Creek." And with that, the battle commenced. The Scarecrow unleashed its full power. With a wave of its hand, it sent a flock of crows diving towards the crowd, their sharp beaks and talons aiming to wound. But the townspeople were prepared. Using their torches, they created a wall of fire, keeping the birds at bay. Lily, recalling the old legends, began chanting an ancient rhyme, hoping to weaken the Scarecrow's hold over the shadows. As she chanted, others joined in, their voices rising in unison, creating a protective barrier against the encroaching darkness. Jake and Sam, using makeshift slingshots, aimed for the Scarecrow's eyes, hoping to blind it. Miguel, with his paints, drew symbols on the ground, creating traps to ensnare the creature. But the Scarecrow was not to be underestimated. It manipulated the shadows to form dark apparitions, ghostly figures that lunged at the townspeople, causing panic and disarray. Mrs. Patterson, clutching an old amulet, tried to repel these spirits, her voice a steady prayer against the onslaught. The battle raged on, with neither side willing to relent. The air was thick with tension, smoke, and the cries of both man and bird. The town square, illuminated by the moon and the flickering torches, bore witness to a confrontation that would be spoken of for generations. In the midst of the chaos, a moment of clarity emerged. The townspeople, realizing the source of the Scarecrow's anguish, began to shout apologies, acknowledging their wrongs and pleading for forgiveness. The Scarecrow, pausing for a moment, seemed to waver, its resolve momentarily shaken. The outcome of the battle hung in the balance, with the future of Hollow Creek and its residents teetering on the edge of darkness and hope. Amidst the chaos and desperation, a small figure emerged from the crowd. It was Emily, a young girl no older than 10, known for her gentle nature. While others had mocked and tormented the Scarecrow, Emily had shown it kindness. She would often be seen talking to it during her walks, sometimes leaving wildflowers at its base or mending its tattered clothes. With a courage that belied her age, she stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the din. "Stop," she cried, her eyes locked onto the Scarecrow's glowing buttons. The square fell silent, all eyes on the child and the sentinel. "I know you're hurt," she continued, tears streaming down her face. "But this isn't the way. I've always been your friend." The Scarecrow, seemingly recognizing the child, tilted its head, the crows circling above growing restless. Emily, undeterred, approached the Scarecrow, reaching out to touch its straw-filled hand. Memories of Emily's kindness flooded the Scarecrow's consciousness, the soft touch of her hands as she fixed a button, her laughter as she danced around it, the warmth of the sun on days she'd replaced its hat. In that moment, the Scarecrow's rage was juxtaposed with memories of genuine kindness. The townspeople watched in bated breath, hoping that the innocence and compassion of a child might be the key to quelling the Scarecrow's wrath and saving Hollow Creek from its darkest Halloween. With the town square enveloped in an eerie silence, Emily took a deep breath, her voice soft yet unwavering. "I remember the days when I'd pass by the fields," she began, her eyes never leaving the Scarecrow's. "While others saw you as just an old figure, I saw a guardian, watching over the crops and the land." She stepped closer, the townspeople watching with bated breath. I remember the days I'd sit by you, sharing stories, fixing your torn clothes, and placing flowers by your feet. You were never alone, not truly. Tears glistened in her eyes as she continued, I know the pain and loneliness you feel, the anger from the pranks and the laughter. But remember the moments of kindness, the gentle touches, and the care. Not everyone was cruel. Holding out her small hands, she made her plea, if you stop this rampage, I promise to care for you, to mend your tattered form and ensure you're never alone again. Let's bring back the peace to Hollow Creek, together. The Scarecrow, seemingly processing her words, stood still, its once menacing aura now filled with uncertainty. The memories of Emily's kindness, the soft touch of her hands, and the warmth of her presence battled against its desire for revenge. The fate of Hollow Creek now rested on the bond between a child and a once-forgotten sentinel. Inside the Scarecrow, a storm of emotions raged. Memories of years of neglect and ridicule clashed with the few moments of genuine kindness it had experienced. Emily's voice echoed in its consciousness, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness of its vengeance. The Scarecrow remembered the warmth of the sun on days Emily had replaced its hat, the gentle touch of her hands mending its clothes, and the soft whispers of stories she'd share. These memories began to overpower the anger, the hurt, and the desire for revenge. As the internal battle intensified, the Scarecrow's movements became erratic, the crows above disoriented, and the shadows writhing in confusion. The townspeople watched, their hearts pounding, hoping for a sign of relent. Then, slowly, the Scarecrow's posture softened. The menacing glow in its eyes dimmed, replaced by a calm, almost human-like gaze. The crows, sensing the change, dispersed into the night, and the shadows retreated. The townspeople, realizing the Scarecrow's decision, began to step forward, led by the town's elders. Mrs. Patterson, her voice filled with remorse, spoke, we promise, from this day forth, to respect and care for you, acknowledging our past wrongs and ensuring they never happen again. The townsfolk nodded in agreement, their faces a mix of relief and newfound understanding. The Scarecrow, now standing still and serene, seemed to acknowledge their promise. Hollow Creek had faced its darkest night, but with dawn approaching, the town emerged united, with a renewed respect for traditions, legends, and the silent sentinel that watched over their fields. In the days following the harrowing Halloween night, Hollow Creek transformed. The townspeople, united by the events, worked hand in hand to repair the damages. Homes were rebuilt, streets cleaned, and the fields tended too. The Scarecrow, once a symbol of fear and ridicule, now stood as a revered guardian. Children were taught its story, ensuring that future generations would respect and honor its presence. Emily, with the help of others, lovingly restored the Scarecrow, replacing its tattered clothes and giving it a prominent place in the town square. Every year, on Halloween, the townsfolk would gather around it, not in fear, but in gratitude and remembrance, celebrating the night Hollow Creek learned the true value of respect and understanding. As autumn leaves danced in the wind, the vast farmlands of Hollow Creek shimmered under the golden sun. In the heart of the field stood the Scarecrow, now tall and proud, its once tattered form now mended and strong. Emily, with her hair tied in a loose braid, approached it, her eyes reflecting the deep bond they shared. She gently touched its arm, a silent gesture of gratitude and understanding. Around them, the laughter of children echoed, their playful shadows stretching across the ground. They ran around the Scarecrow, playing hide and seek, their innocent giggles filling the air. The Scarecrow, once a symbol of terror, now watched over them like a protective guardian, its presence a testament to the town's transformation. In the distance, the townspeople looked on, their faces wearing smiles of contentment. The past horrors were now tales of lessons learned, and the Scarecrow stood as a beacon of hope and unity. As the sun began its descent, casting a warm orange hue over Hollow Creek, Emily sat down beside the Scarecrow, looking out at the horizon. The two of them, girl and guardian, stood as symbols of a town reborn, a testament to the power of understanding, compassion, and second chances.